Matt Spathas. So you have a bio, and I'm just going to bring this up for a moment. And you can see up there that he is not an educator, coming out of the real estate world, and I don't actually know what to say about Matt Spathas, because some people are sort of enigmas to me. Enigmas because why is, like, I can understand Peter Sibley being interested in education because he runs a company that works with education. I understand my husband being interested in education because he works with higher education companies. But I couldn't understand Matt except that he's a parent who very, very much cares about the quality of education his own children are getting, but looks far broader than that, not only at the schools where his children go to school, but also the schools throughout the city, and I would dare to say wants to have an impact even beyond that. So I'm going to stop there and tell you that he's an advisory board member, a new board member. I'm thrilled he's on the advisory board. We have a new subcommittee where we're looking at learning in the digital age. So I'm hoping that he will be an active participant in that. And I know you're going to enjoy him because our faculty had Matt come in about 4 or 5 months ago. And what was it you said, Dr. Manda?
I said he shook us all up.
Yeah. Okay, he shook them up. So I think he's going to shake some of you up. So Matt, please.
Great. Thank you. I've heard worse than that. Don't want you to do that.
I'm back for more.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for that nice introduction. It really is a privilege and honor for me to be here. There's so much great energy here in this room at these sessions, but also here at USD. And one thing that's really interesting to me is that if you noticed on the college, it's the Department of Learning and Teaching. And that was the first thing that struck me when I met Dean Paula here, was that learning was before teaching. And I think that we're so used to hearing teaching before learning. And in this next generation, we're all learners. So I really connected my first visit up here with the dean, and it's been a real privilege for me to get to know more folks up here, and in particular the staff. And so thank you very much for having me here. Paula mentioned that I am a parent, 4 kids. I used to have a full head of hair. Our kids are 21, 19, 17, and 15. And our oldest is actually interning in Hong Kong this summer. And I'll tell you a little bit about that and why that happened. And then our other 3 are in college and high school. But I became involved in education maybe 15 years ago on a hot summer day in an elementary school. There was a conversation in a room that was the library, and about 30 computers came in and were sat on the floor next to the library. And there was a wall between these 2 rooms. And Mrs. White was the librarian, who was used to reading in a quiet room. 30 computers were on the floor. And there was a 4-hour meeting about whether there ought to be a wall up between the room where there's computers on the floor and the quiet room where Mrs. White could read to the kids. And I called up San Diego Unified and I said, is there a best practice and standard? Where's the vision for this school site that's having to figure out something on a local basis? And frankly, at that time, there wasn't a vision for what that new learning environment might look like. And you could start to see the culture clash, couldn't you? Between Mrs. White reading to kids on the floor quietly, computers coming in connected to the internet, and kids that were ready to learn a little bit differently. So the wall came down, and needless to say, when I left that meeting, I was looking for a word that could maybe share the next generation of vision. And it wasn't library, but I said, what if we drop the L off library? Let's call it an ibrary, I for information. Whether it's text or digital, it really doesn't matter. And the person in that room, the evangelist, if you will, at the school site, let's call that person an librarian, not a librarian. But that person needs a new skill set of text and digital skills, right? And so that's what got me thinking about this next generation of delivery and really becoming passionate about transformation in education, but more importantly, engaging and empowering and preparing and educating all students to compete in the 21st century. Now, I can tell you that I'm scared. I'm really, really scared, and I'm going to share some reasons why I'm scared. Our oldest son is a junior at Oregon State. He's been there 3 years. Out-of-state tuition is about $20,000 a year. So $60,000 later, does he have $60,000 of education? Is he ready to compete in this next generation of learning? Now, an example on that would be this, and I'm not picking on my son because he and I have had this conversation. In his first day of internship, he was set out to go out and research buildings and grab some data in buildings. Look at the downtown buildings in Hong Kong, plot them on a database, right? And then bring back a survey to his office so they could use that in a database. Real practical experience, right? So I asked him, how are you going to do that? He said, well, I'm going to do what they told me to do. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to put it in a database, I'm going to drop it in an Excel spreadsheet. So that's interesting. Have you thought about putting that on a Google map where you can actually click the dots and information pops up and the database pops up and it's three-dimensional, it's all open source. Now, he said, well, gee, Dad, that's kind of an IT thing. I need a programmer for that. I said, is it an IT thing or is it a 21st century skill? That's a question. And then redefining what does digital literacy mean in the 21st century. So think maybe about that as I go through, maybe share some ideas with you. Let me just give you a little bit about the lens that I'm looking through. Oh, yeah. Did I not turn that on?
Yeah, you're behind the podium, which is great.
Okay, I'm sorry. So my lens is this. I was a struggling academic student. I was not engaged. I thought I was in school to play sports. I barely graduated from high school. I think I had a 2.2 and you needed a 2.5 back then to get into college. I was on academic probation my first term in college, and I can remember walking to the Oregon State campus with 15,000 students and saying, I've got to be smarter than one of these students here. That's how nervous I was. Academic probation my first term in college, honor roll my second term, but I did it through fear. I was really, really scared about whether I could actually graduate from college. So my lens isn't one from strong academic success. My lens is really from a student that was not engaged in school. So I just wanted to give you a little bit about that perspective. I'm in the real estate business, been in San Diego for 20 years in real estate. We play at the intersection of real estate and technology, but I think the dynamic is really the same. Our boxes are big boxes full of tenants. Your boxes are smaller boxes full of students. And the more connected and engaging we can make our buildings, the more rent we get. The more connected and engaging you can make your learning environments, the better students you can produce. So I think there's this intersection of education and technology, and let's not even call it technology. Let's call it transformation. Let's drop the T word of technology because it means something different to everybody. And let's really talk about transformation of a 150-year-old delivery system. So with that, how do we teach every student in the digital age? And I want to share maybe some thoughts. We have the obligation, I think, to reinvent education in a way to engage, empower, and educate all students. We have the opportunity to help students find their passion and to develop passionate lifelong learners, which I think is the worker of the 21st century. And if you think about that, are there any classes offered anywhere on finding your passion? Does anybody offer that class in any of your schools? I think that's really, really important. Because if there's one thing that I can convey to my kids is please, the journey is really to find your passion. And if that's the journey, how come we aren't helping kids to identify what their passion is? And do we have learning environments that enable that? There was a conversation last night at dinner. We were talking about 21st century skills. And I was thinking about that after dinner, and I was thinking that, are we talking about 21st century skills, or are we talking about 21st century learning environments of which skills become a byproduct of that? And what are 21st century skills anyway? What do 21st century learning environments look like? We've got the need to create 21st century learning environments that look and feel more like Starbucks and less like prisons. And if you've been to a lot of our schools, particularly the high schools, they do look and feel like prisons. I was at a high school in San Diego. I left at 10:30 in the morning. I walked to the gate, and it was locked. I couldn't get out of the campus. And I said, are you locking these gates because you're afraid these learners will leave? Or are you locking these gates because you're afraid that crime will come to the campus? I think it was a little bit of both. But that concerns me when we're locking learners in to a learning environment. We have a duty to redefine curriculum filled with relevant content and relevant context and build critical thinking skills. What percent of today's content in curriculum do you think is relevant to tomorrow's worker? Is it 10%? Is it 90%? Is it 50%? And who is identifying that metric of relevant content and relevant context, even as important as that? I can tell you from my experience as a parent, I think it's less than 50%. I think that our generation, placing our values on what was important when we grew up, is imposing a different kind of value system on the skills that our students are going to need in the future. So all of this requires bold digital age leadership and unconstrained vision. And so let's maybe set the table for this session, if you could. Let's have an unconstrained vision about what education can be. No constraints, no barriers, no costs, no school boards, no politics. Let's have an unconstrained vision, dialogue, energy, ideas about what education can be. So, old media and 6 p.m. network news. How many of you can raise your hand, it's okay. How many of you still get the newspaper at home in your driveway? Raise your hand. Okay, it's 4 hours old the day you get it. It's not green. There's somebody driving to every house to drop it off. It costs $17 a month. I just quit my subscription, so I know that. Good time recession, $17 a month, save money, right? 6 o'clock news. Now, kids don't do either one of those things, do they? So, but I would argue that we're taking this kind of delivery system and we're dropping it into the laps of our students at schools. I would suggest to you that we're handing them one of these. You remember these things? We really are when they've got a PlayStation. Now, if I said, here, I want you to learn today, and I was handing you that device, would you be very engaged? Might be fun. It'd be fun to play with it, wouldn't it? This is interesting to me, and I saw this the other day in Wired magazine. In 1969, this kitchen computer that Honeywell developed, it cost $10,600, and it was going to be used to, it was really sexist back then, housewives to cook dinner. And the only thing that it could do is really provide recipes and maybe do some accounting, but you had to have some programming skills to use it. And I was reading the article, and the Honeywell team spent thousands of hours in meetings really kind of describing what this product would do. Now, I would suggest to you that as jobs change, how are we going to train, and if you can think about this in an educational context, training students to do this is not even relevant anymore, right, with this product. So think about 1969, fast forward today, we've got an iPhone in our hands. And the skill sets that we might have been teaching. So how are we going to teach kids for jobs, products, and needs that we haven't even seen yet? And I might even suggest to you that as educators, as lifelong learners, all of us, that to try to see the future, we have an obligation to try to be the future. Does that make sense? And with our students, if we're going to help prepare them for the future, don't we have to try to see the future? And if it's going to help us to see it, don't we have to try to be it? To be passionate lifelong learners, to embrace change, to embrace new ideas, to embrace globalization, to embrace 6 billion connected PCs, to embrace thinking differently. The U.S. Department of Labor estimates that by age 38, these students today will have 10 jobs. That's not our generation. How in the world are we going to prepare this generation for that? For that chaos, for that change, for that level of innovation and entrepreneurship that's going to be required, for the self-starting skills that are going to need to be required for that. In a flat world, workers compete globally, and we've got to prepare students for jobs that don't even exist. Now, how many of you have heard of ELANs? One. Okay. When you get home, get on ELANs. This number right here, $203 million of sales, I think, in ELANC's history of maybe 4 years. You can put any job on ELANC, and the world will bid on it. So you can pick, I think this says, what's that say? design and multimedia, there's legal, sales and marketing, finance. The world will bid on it, full with reviews for those that bid on it. And you ought to see some of the hourly rates. You talk about inflation or deflation, wage rates in India versus wage rates in the United States, a flat world. I personally believe we're going to have more deflation because as the world becomes flatter, prices will come down as the world bids on it. And the wage rates in India are not the same as the United States. We outsourced work to India. 6 months ago, 8 months ago on a real estate project, all financial accounting work outsourced to India because we needed it on a Monday. This was a Friday. We needed it in 2 days. It was done 5 times cheaper, 5 times faster than we could get it done in the US, and it was done by people that had their masters in taxation. Right? So what is that doing to inflation or deflation in terms of driving the cost structure, the wage structure down in the United States? You can start to see and feel this global pressure that I believe in a flat world will be put on the whole wage structure of the US. Pre-flat world, we had kind of a self-contained environment. Flat world, not self-contained, no protectionism, wages come down, globally competitive, ELAN's bidding jobs. I'm going to do my first bid on this. I have not used this yet, but my iBury.com website I'm actually have done scoped on ELANS from a designer that'll be somewhere around the world. So what's holding back the transformation of education? And I would suggest to you that it's our generation, that the legacy of the one-room schoolhouse, school as we remember it, is holding back school the way it can be. This was some quotes by the Web-Based Education Commission and the 21st Partnership for 21st Century Skills. And I love this quote down here because does this happen at every school every day? From the secretary at the front desk returning emails, who said that to me this morning? Somebody mentioned that. All the way out to the edge of the teacher and the skill sets they have. Does that happen in every single training session, in every single meeting, and every single dialogue at your respective school sites? Toffler says, and I think this is important, I just finished reading his book, Revolutionary Wealth. We're living through the deepest upheaval in the world knowledge system since our species started to think, and until we digest that point, our best laid plans will misfire. Now, I think this quote is really important in education because I would use a plane and a boat analogy. Are we trying to make boats go faster when we have airplanes? And maybe just hold that thought as we show you some examples of that. Prensky, and I see he's coming. The speaker series here, by the way, is phenomenal. The Spotlight series. These are some great thought leaders in education. And so I think these flyers were passed out to everybody. Try to make those if you can. There's some just phenomenal speakers and very diverse as well. Prensky says, and he's one of the speakers here, learners are looking for 21st century skills and our teachers don't have them. That's not the teacher's fault. It's a generational issue that we've got to figure out how to solve. Gates talks about schools that were really designed for 30 or 40 years ago. Larry Smarr right here at UCSD, kids don't get reading books that were written 20 years ago. I mean, that one-dimensional book that's not hyperlinked, it's not video clip, it's not real-time, it's not cross-referenced, that they can't dig deeply into. We put them in a one-dimensional world, and they're coming out of a four-dimensional world. Shirley Grover, she's no longer the principal, but she started the School of Future in Philadelphia. I love what they did. There's an interesting, before school started at the School of Future, which was subsidized, not subsidized, but Microsoft made a pretty large investment in that school. All the students met online before school. And let me say that from a student's perspective, that their virtual world is the same as our physical world. Do you believe that? That me talking to you physically is the same as me talking to you virtually? You don't believe that? I think that kids believe that. Now, that might be an extreme example, and I'm saying some things that maybe I don't agree with, but I want to maybe stimulate some dialogue in that space. So, is it our value system that we impose that it's not the same, or can we respect their value system and then communicate in a way that that they're used to communicating with. Look at kids' Facebooks, 400, 500 friends, 600 friends, and they're global. They're all around the world. Very cool. But I love what Shirley Grover says right here, which is the school of future, relevant and adaptive, and relevant is the key linchpin. And then look at this quote right here. I can tell you as a student, I used to always ask that question. It was really more like, why do I have to learn this? But if we can't answer that question, I go back to relevant content, context. And who is in charge of rewriting and redefining curriculum? Who is in charge in the state of California, in the county of San Diego, in the city of San Diego? Who is in charge of reinventing curriculum to make sure that it's engaging and relevant? Does anybody know? I don't. So maybe we're talking about redefining job descriptions as well. Michael Furtick came to San Diego. He spoke to the community of the county. And Michael Furtick sold his first company for $1 million at age 14, 15, or 16. And actually dropped out of high school to go to work for Microsoft as an intern. Had trouble doing that, by the way. The school system knew how to deal with that. To give him credit for that, for real life, real world experience. Sold his first company for $1 million at 16, started a company called TakingItGlobal.com, and think about TakingItGlobal.com as a Facebook, an international Facebook, where each country has their own site, and kids work together, youth work together to solve social causes and social issues in different countries, and they connect in a cleansed site. And I think you're going to do some work on that site later today, right? Today's kids, we've all seen this. I think we all know it. They're media rich. They're networked. I met yesterday with the head of NBC Everywhere. NBC Everywhere. NBC's revenues are going down. Nobody's watching conventional TV anymore, at least nobody under 25. Their revenues are going down. They're looking for new media revenues. So what does NBC Everywhere do? They put their content everywhere. And one of the most fastest growing places they're putting their content is in video games. They are the conduit to sell the ads in the video game. So when your kids or grandkids play Madden 2010 and they run into the stadium and they see the Bud Light ad or the whatever ad on the scoreboard to make the stadium look real in the virtual world, kind of Second Life-ish. You've seen, all these high-definition video games the kids are playing online against other kids all over the world, talking with their headsets, right? You've seen that? If you haven't seen it, watch a kid do that. So it's a whole new business line for NBC Media of creating digital ad content in video games that is becoming close to, not surpassing, but becoming a big driver in the revenue model for NBC Everywhere. And while we're talking about video games, think about how students learn those skills to play those video games. Where did they learn them? How did they learn them? And if you've ever played against them, you know what shortcuts are? I can't play video games, but you know what shortcuts are? They go on the internet and they look for cheat codes. And then they come in and you're doing this, kind of like what you're supposed to do, and they've got some cheat code where their player's like jumping over you. Now, that's a kind of a critical thinking skill, isn't it? I mean, they had to think about it, they had to go and they had to research it, they had to implement it, they had to use hand-eye coordination, they had to compete. And there's actually a lot of research around video gaming, screen time, that might suggest that video gaming is okay. It's actually, statistically, they say, produces better surgeons, hand-eye coordination. So when we talk about screen time, we're used to paper time. Kids are used to screen time. Now we're having a form factor discussion. Too much of anything is not good, probably. But whether they're looking at paper or whether they're looking at a screen, one-dimensional, three-dimensional, and by the way, digital paper will be here in our life, right? It'll be here, so this will be digital in this form factor. MIT's got a fab. If you go to the TED conference, and remind me, I'll send you the link, and look at the presentation on 6th Sense and form factor where I can walk up to you and I can learn all about you because your Facebook profile is on your chest, right? Because I've got a sensor that you're wearing a sensor and you can turn it on or turn it off, but that technology is here now. So can you imagine? I think in our lifetime I'll be able to walk to you, and if you're on, hey, you like sports, you like golf, you like education, you're a teacher, whatever those metrics are, right? Be interesting if we're all walking around with that on our chest, wouldn't it? Kind of change the dynamic. But isn't it a 21st century name tag when you think about it? I mean, this is kind of that. It's got my name and a company. I just don't have all those other tags on there, right? Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, online gaming, the net, instant messaging, texting, global and connected. Kids all do it. It's okay. The school paranoia about stay off MySpace, it's dangerous. It's more dangerous going to a park than it is being on MySpace. Media paranoia about the net starts to shape parent images, blocking kids' internet time. Stay off the internet 2 hours a day. Do we say stay off that book? Only 2 hours a day reading that book. We don't do that. But I want my kids to go out and play, right? Outside like I used to. Well, sure, too much of anything is not good. But again, I would challenge you on what we're talking to our kids about. Tapscott, in his book, Grown Up Digital, talks about this global generation being the smartest ever. I think it is. I think these kids are really, really smart kids. They're more connected. They're more aware. Much harder challenge for us to engage them. Look at some of their stats, and this is what Tapscott says. He says the problem's not the net generation, but the befuddled baby boomers that are clueless about the revolutionary changes that are taking place right in front of us. And I really believe that. It's a generational thing. So my epiphany. I went to Asia 4 years ago, 2004. I think I went to 5 countries, 8 cities, toured 38 real estate projects, looking for the best real estate in the world that we could bring back those ideas to San Diego and implement in our portfolio. I also visited 2 international schools because I wanted to get the vibe of what was going on in the international schools. One school in Shanghai and one school in Beijing, and I was blown away with what I saw back there. But what I felt was a sense of urgency, passion. I felt connected, clean, vibrant, motivated by fear. And so when I came back, I said to my kids, I said, you're not competing against the student down the hall, down the street, across the state, across the country. You're competing with 1.3 billion people in China, 4 billion in Asia, and they want what you have. And they want it more than you want it. Now, my kids, they kind of went, huh? Let me get back on my PlayStation again. What'd you say? Now, I couldn't bring that to them. So I started thinking about that, and I was having conversations with some educators in Asia, and I said, gee, I feel like you're really motivated over by fear and a sense of urgency. I don't think we can move that over to the United States, because I'm trying to give my kids some fear and some sense of urgency. They don't have it. He said, well, we're probably not motivated as much by fear as we are by a sense of urgency. Okay, well, that's interesting. So my thought when I came back here and talking to my kids, if our kids aren't going to be motivated by fear and aren't going to be motivated by a sense of urgency because this generation of kids have kind of what they want, and by the way, this generation of kids will be the first generation ever to live to a lower standard than their parents. That's on us. That's on us. I wasn't getting a Gatorade in the middle of the second inning in the dugout by my mom, right? Or a bag of water carried by the parent to the soccer field. I think we weren't this coddled generation that I've been part of with my kids. But I want to go back to the fear and the passion for just a second. Fear and urgency, I'm sorry. If our kids here are not going to be motivated by fear and urgency, can they be motivated by finding their passion? I think that is going to be the key to unlocking this next generation of kids. I can't emphasize that enough. In my world, when I see students come to me with interviews, Hello, Mr. Spathas. Nice to see you. I just graduated from USC in communications. I'm not sure what I want to do, but I think I want to maybe be in real estate. And I'm going to go down and maybe talk to somebody about communications and talk to somebody else about something else. $100,000 a year later, that $100,000 later, that's the kind of conversation we're having? That scares me. Academic inflation, undergraduate degree, maybe a college degree today is a high school degree when we grew up. I worry about that. The world's population. The US is just a blip. I show this visual to kids because I think most adults know it, but I think the visual is always good. We are just a blip on the radar screen that was able to compete in a closed world. I think 11% of China's driving. What's going to happen when they all drive? The energy that I felt in Asia, all over Asia, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, this sense of urgency, this change. When I landed at the airport, if you ever move through Asia in the airports, you move quickly, right? So it's easy to get around. The infrastructure is new. They invest in infrastructure. It's not like Grand Central Station in New York where you got time warp and graffiti and dirty and phones don't work, right? In Asia, you pull your phone out and you can point it at the Coke machine and your soda comes out because their currency is embedded in their phone. Do you know cash costs the US $1 trillion a year having cash? $1 trillion a year is the cost of the cash currency in the US. Why do we still have cash? Somebody said that in China, the reason they're so much more innovative is because their leaders have engineering backgrounds. Now think about that and think about our US Senate. Okay? Think about the difference. These conversations they're having. 911, Homeland Security. 8 years later, we're still getting naked at the airport, taking our belt off, pulling our laptop out. When you go through the airport in Asia, there's a laser that zaps you for SARS to make sure your temperature's okay. You're not taking your belt off and your shoes off and pulling your laptop out. You're moving quickly right through the technology that they've enabled there. Now, I would suggest to you that 8 years later, why don't we have biometrics at the airport? Fictitious security. You heard about the college students that created a site online where you actually print a boarding pass. So you go online, pick your airline's print a boarding pass, just walk right by security and go all the way down the gate. They just want to prove a point that we had this fictitious security at the airport. That's what Homeland Security's been doing for 8 years. Where is the biometric security that walks up, my thumbprint, it knows it's Matt Spathas, Fast Track. That, by the way, went bankrupt. The government outsourced it to a private company to try to do Fast Track at the airports. So who's in charge of Homeland Security? Where's the next generation of solutions? And why don't we have them? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I pointed out to students that here's the makeup. American Asian students at those 4 universities. 4% of the US population, 20% of the Ivy League, and a pretty significant. So what's going on there? By the way, this whole presentation is available on ibrary.com, so I'll show you the link too. Mandarin Chinese, largest language in the world, almost 1 billion people speak it. It was taught in Chicago public schools 4 years ago, starting to be taught and Carol Berry's here. She was very instrumental in implementing Mandarin in San Diego Unified Public Schools and in our own community of Point Loma. But why are we defaulting to Spanish? I'm not saying Spanish is not an important language, but that's the way it has been. What should the worker of the future be equipped with? And should it be 1 or 2 languages? But I would suggest to you that if I were a kid today, coming up, a student today, that I'd English, granted, Mandarin, yes, and probably Spanish, yes. I'd check those 3 boxes. Now what's next? The worker of the future, I think, is a passionate lifelong learner that can compete in a connected world. I think it's as simple as that. Now, I want to move into just assessment and real-time and diagnostics. This is a screenshot. That's the bike I ride in my health club. It's connected to the internet. This is a screenshot of when I go home and log in, because I put my cell phone in to my bike, right? It's plugged in the internet, and it tracks all my workouts. heart rate and calories and all that stuff, right? I've worked out since then. This is an old screenshot. But my point is I'm getting real-time diagnostics on how I'm doing. And by the way, I'm able to see how I'm competing against other people around the world. Real time, right? So this guy is in, where is he? Missouri, Utah. I can pull him up by age groups, by time, by date. Now, if I can do this for a workout, why can't I do this for academic progress? Edmund was talking about real-time diagnostics and assessment. Not every quarter, or in arrears, or once a year. But why can't we have real-time diagnostics? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Point Loma High School website, I point this out because the front door, we made the IP address, the internet address, more important or as important. Let's say as important as the street address. So if you believe that the web address is as important as the street address in a physical and virtual world and treat them as important, this site in 30 days had 38,000 visits, 150,000 page views from 66 countries. Now teachers are posting homework, they're podcasting, it's where the real-time information is. Parents are change their culture, they go to the web first, they don't call, right, for communication. Every teacher has their own web page, every teacher is posting their own homework. RSS feeds, real simple syndication. I don't know if there's a button on there. You're using RSS feeds here at USD, I know. But RSS feeds are here to stay. And let me just show you an example of that if I can. This is my newspaper in the morning. So where I used to walk out to my driveway to read that four-hour-old newspaper, and I have the Hong Kong clock in there because I'm not very good sometimes calculating 15 hours time change. And it was easier to just drop the clock on there so I can not call my son in the middle of the night. So here's kind of just my digital dashboard of what I get up and do in the morning. But Sir Ken Robinson, which is one of your speakers, I follow his tweets on Twitter, so you can see him right here. I read the Hong Kong newspaper. I like to follow the stock market. I don't do very well in it. That's telling me where I am. I guess I know where I am, but I'm right here right now. It's GPS tracking, right? Using the Google tool, right? I read the Asia Times online, the India Business. Also, in the whole Iraq situation, I was reading all the Iraqi papers. I wanted to see their perspective. I didn't want to see Fox and CNN and MSNBC, but I wanted to try to find their newspapers as well to see what they were saying about what we were doing. Globally connected. Now, personally, I feel much more knowledgeable after about a half hour here than I did reading my newspaper in the morning, right? Now, these are all RSS feeds coming in to me, and I actually have our kids' homework as RSS feed to me as well, so I can go to each student, because all our schools use those websites, and have RSS feeds. So I just wanted to share that piece with you a little bit. Let me just drop back to '21st century skills. A lot of work needs to be done in this space. I don't know what they are. I think a whole dialogue needs to really be defined about what these skills are, but this was from the partnership of 21st Century Skills. Ken Kay is another speaker who's coming, phenomenal speaker, and brilliant ideas in the space of connected education, but here's what they identified as 21st century skills, or some of the things they identified as 21st century skills. Why do we need innovation in education? Because it looks the same. It really does. Not black and white anymore, but I think that particularly in high school, kids are bored, and I'm going to show you some stats on that. You probably already know them. But I'm going to say that high school is broken. It probably needs to be blown up. I don't think that incremental change is going to work in high school. Personally, that's my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. That's my opinion, though. Now, if we could invent schools where kids look like that, they could not wait. And by the way, that's my oldest son. He's in Hong Kong, and I said, every morning you get up, I want you guys fired up, excited to get in the office with a passion. So I made him actually pose for that shot. I don't think he was really that excited. And that's his buddy who's also over there interning. They're living at the YWCA in the Central Business District of Hong Kong in a little 150 square foot room. I mean, beds next to each other, standing on top of each other, and they're there for 60 days to try to figure out. And they're at a company called Asia Pacific Properties. I'm hoping that every student will have the experience to go abroad. And I would challenge most students, it's in vogue to go abroad to Europe, which I think is important. But Europe and Asia are completely different vibes. And I think we default, like we defaulted to Spanish, we default to Europe. And I would challenge all of us to think differently about that and ideally go both places. The best of the urgency and the best of maybe what has been in a different lifestyle. But the secret sauce is, how do we change a system where kids feel like they have to learn to wanting to learn? That's the secret sauce, isn't it? Kids running to school, can't wait to get in, staying late. Hey, teach me more, help me more, right? Take me to that school. And what's that school look like? What does it look like? Is it bells every 50 minutes? Kids locked in a classroom, sitting down, single subject, moving down to the next classroom? Is that what it is? I was up at Apple headquarters and Stephanie Powers presented the slide. She said I could use it. She called it the Qantas flight education. Sit down, face forward, strap yourself in, turn off your electronic devices, and be bored for several hours. And if you're lucky, the trip will be relevant. It's a cute slide. It's a little bit aggressive maybe, but I think that is our challenge in education, that I think that if you go into high school environments where kids are bored, and this was in The Economist. I could not believe this. I had to put their logo on there because I didn't want you to think that I wrote it. America's lazy school children. I was on the plane to go into Hong Kong. Any of you read that article? Yeah. America's lazy school children was on like the cover of the magazine. And they had this shot right here of the books and the soda and remote control. But it talks about what our image of education was. Our complacent parents that maybe aren't complacent on purpose, but they just haven't maybe seen or experienced or even felt like what might be coming, what might be around the corner when our lifestyles change. We find it hard to believe that Chinese students will steal our children's job and brain work's going the way of manual work. It's who can provide the best value for the money. Remember the ELANs? This is a little dated. This is 2003, but I think it gives you a flavor. This is reading, math, science. You probably all know this. And how we rank, and this was Time Magazine's America Flunking Science. This is what really hit me, and I think as educators you probably all know this, and I know these statistics are hard to get, and you'll hear maybe they're not very accurate, but even if they're close, if this is right, 1 out of 3 students drop out, and if it's 50% if you're Latino or African American, if you're 68% of fourth graders perform below proficiency. I mean, you can just go on and on and on. If this is right, then high school is not working. High school students, some of the reasons they drop out. This was interesting to me. 80% have passing grades when they drop out. And then this was also interesting to me. This was off the Millikan Foundation. Less than 20% of the students will graduate with an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, with associates within 3 and bachelor's degree within 6. That was mind-boggling to me. I show this to kids all the time. I think every single high school student should see this. That these are average earnings over your career, over your lifespan. So with a high school degree, Brad's here from Potter. I spoke to the 1,000 kids at Potter Elementary, 7th and 8th graders, and I showed them, they saw lots of slides, but the one they kept coming back to was, I think I need to go to college because I think I'd like to make $2 million over my career instead of 1. They got that, right? But so this is showing kids, and how come every kid in high school doesn't know this? This metric, just this one simple fact that if you go to college, you'll double your earnings over a lifetime on average. I think that's pretty material. I think that would actually motivate kids. Not that money is the end-all, be-all to everything, but I think kids get that. It's common currency that we all get. The unemployment rates, how those correspond to various degrees, I think that's obvious. And this is something that is mind-boggling to me. UC is going to it's going from 12% to 10%, right, for students. And so they're only going to take the top 10% of students into the UC system out of the state of California. Did I say that right? It's from 12 to 10. Yeah. So San Diego Unified, just to give you an example, their whole curriculum and content, not curriculum and content, their credit system is all designed around the UC system. So example, grade suppression. In the UC system, if you flunk or get a D, you can take a class again. It'll suppress the grade. But if you get a C, you can't do that. That's in the UC system. In the state system, you can take it as many times as you want, and the best grade wins. Now, I hear educators go, oh, hey, you get one chance, that's it. We can't have kids taking classes a million times to get an A. Why not? And if only 10% of the kids get into UC schools, why does San Diego Unified have a credit system that adheres to UC standards if 90% of the kids are going somewhere else? I haven't had anybody be able to answer that question to me. And then you throw in online courses on top of that where kids can actually get schedules to work where they can take classes again, starts to change the dynamic, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Okay. How many of you have text message Google a question? Raise your hand. Okay. Did you know that if you text message Google, they'll text message the answer back, free and fast? And by the way, use Google 411. Don't ever call 411 anymore from your cell phone. Use Google 411. No ads. Google 411. Say the name of the state, please. Say the name of the business. They actually connect your call and text message you, all the information as well, free. Pretty good system, Google 411. But if you text message, now we ban cell phones at schools, don't we? I think that's a learning device, right? Goes back to the Qantas thing. But here's maybe a takeaway to think about here. If old delivery in education was really geared, was a factoid delivery system that was really geared to knowing the answer, and I believe it was, and that whole factoid discussion, my daughter had to memorize how many miles the Lewis and Clark route was. My son had to memorize all 50 states on a map. And then a week later, he couldn't remember. He got 100%, but a week later, he couldn't remember where they were. All of them. He probably got, 80%. Now, is that relevant content and context? Now, we had a heated discussion with some teachers. So I think memorizing those 50 states is really, really important. So I have factoid delivery. I don't know. Good dialogue. Because I think that's the kind of dialogue that we're going to need to have if we're really going to get down to relevant and engaging content and context and prepare students for 21st century. I don't think it's relevant. I think it's factoid-based delivery. And my point of that is that if we can text Google the question and they'll give us the answer, if old delivery was based on the answer, new delivery should be based on the question. Critical thinking skills. Does that make sense? If the answer is going to be in our hand, which I think it will be, then we're going to need to know the question, not the answer. And we're going to need to acquire skills, those critical thinking skills that will help us define the questions that need to be asked. Encyclopedia Britannica, how are we doing on time? Okay. So I want to do some questions and answers. Hopefully there'll be some I don't think anybody uses Encyclopedia Britannica anymore, but how many of you use Wikipedia? Raise your hand. Probably everybody now, right? How many of you have actually put an entry in Wikipedia? How many? Raise your hand again. Yeah, good. Have you followed your entries that you put into Wikipedia? Have you gone back later? What happened? They did, didn't they? And were they, I mean, were you offended by what they did, or did they make it better, or what did they do? They were more correct. Okay. What happened to you? Yeah, they built on it. Pretty amazing, isn't it? If you haven't put an entry in Wikipedia, do it. There'll be something that you can put in that you know that the world doesn't know yet. Do it and watch the world respond to it. I did it for my high school. It was shut down. I went to an urban high school like Lincoln or Hoover, and our high school got shut down. Linus Pauling actually went to my high school, right? Nobel Prize winner. And not when I was there, but I entered some facts about our high school. It was shut down. And in about 3 hours, there were 6 entries on it. And I did some things that weren't, I was not factually referencing my sources, right? But Wikipedia is run with 5 full-time employees. The world basically does the entry, and it's statistically there's research that shows it's actually more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica. So you can see the power of, we've only got, if the world's population is 6 billion, 1 billion people are connected today. We're working on the next 2 billion. Imagine when that's 6 billion. And imagine when you've got the skills that our kids have where they can really globally connect. And then imagine maybe the dynamics that has on world communication, maybe world peace, world policy. When you're Facebooking the guy you might go to war with. I mean, it's a different dynamic. It's a different strategy. And I think, not to get into political statements, but I think that one of the things this administration has brought to the table, and I'm not an advocate of all the spending, but one of the things that this administration brought to the table is a 21st century administration that's digitally literate. And I don't know if you read the articles about what happened in the White House when Obama came in, and basically computers didn't work, things weren't networked. I mean, it's a different administration now. It is a digitally savvy administration. I think that it's fair to say that. This goes back to Factoid Delivery, and I just wanted to point this out. Michael Lesk did some work for the National Science Center and talked about how much information that our brains can remember. And he basically said that we can remember about 187 kilobytes. It's not even a $10 memory stick anymore. It's probably a $1 memory stick. And then in 70 years of life, we're exposed to about 6 gigabytes of information. You've got those little you handed out thumb drives today, right? How many gigabytes are they? 64 gigs or megs?
Kilobytes, sorry.
Okay. 64 megs. Okay. 64 megs. So 6 kilobytes is about a gigabyte is about a $40 memory stick. And there's 10 times more data on Earth than the minds of the world's population. I thought that was interesting. And so if information has a short shelf life, then knowledge and critical thinking are the key. Think about that in context of factoid education. I don't know how many of you read this article about in Time magazine. What is real knowledge in the Google era? What it means to be a global student, and then learning 2.0 and a new kind of literacy. What does this mean? Who's rewriting these rules? And I go back to redefining jobs and roles and descriptions, and I think I have a slide for that. Digital immigrants and digital natives, you've heard a lot about this. Prensky actually coined this term, one of the speakers at the Spotlight series. But I would say that this is, at least my generation, this is where we play over here, and this is this student generation where they play. And I love this conventional speed versus Twitch speed. And I was talking to a parent the other night that said, you know, when my student studies, I make them turn everything off, turn their headphones off, shut down the internet. They gotta focus, right? Well, there's actually studies that these kids can do much better at multitasking than our generation could. And so we were having this conversation. I know that's what we did, but is that what your students should do? Is it okay that they listen to music, 9 windows open, AOL going, 15 instant messages, and studying at the same time? Is that okay? I think it is. I think it is, certainly as long as they're performing, right? But I wouldn't be so quick to say that's not okay. Remember the library example I gave you? The library and the librarian? This was in the LA Times 10 years ago. I love this. I don't have a very good image of it. But this is the librarian saying, be quiet. And this is kind of the librarian with the keyboard and the tattoo and the headset saying, hey, there's action here. And what did you do at your library here? And it's going to be, do you have to be quiet in there?
Oh no, it's the noisiest building on campus. The students leave the library and they go to our reading room upstairs.
Yeah, but it's a different vibe, a different energy, maybe a place that students want to go, because there's that kind of energy, maybe collaboration as well, connected. I think that's a very cool idea. So let's talk about old delivery being teacher-centric and new delivery being student-centric. But there's a lot of things that have to happen before you get there, including the tools to enable the teacher-centric delivery, which those are definitions that if you've read the book Disruptive Classes, how many of you have read that book, Disrupting Class? If you haven't read that book and you're looking for a book to read Disrupting Class by Clayton Christensen. Harvard professor, School of Business. It's all about this next generation of education. And I'll give you some takeaways on what Christensen says, but I really think he's nailed it on where we're going. The question is just how long is it going to take us to get there? But if we look at Old delivery is the having to learn and book-based curriculum, static, text first, knowing answer, that factoid delivery, and digital age skills not required for teachers, really for administrators. And look at new delivery, where the teacher really moves from the stage to the guide on the side. But we've got to have all the tools and infrastructure in place, I think, to do that. Let me show you some examples of that. Where we've got curriculum that's web-based, assessment that's web-based, and we move into critical thinking era of education. But look at this, student rigor. I'm not a fan of that word rigor. That sounds boring to me, like somebody's beating me up to do something. I love this student engagement, and Prensky uses that a lot. I'm going to share some ideas about new delivery, but let's take cost out of the equation, because I think that new delivery costs less than old delivery. And I won't spend any time on that, but let's take cost. There's not a cost issue, in my opinion, in transformation of education. So a few communities are working on a job description for what skill set a principal should have. Skill sets. And this is in draft form, but does this look like any job description that any of you have seen in education for a principal? Anybody have any job descriptions like that in their districts or communities? So this skill set for the 21st century leader, for this digital age thinker, I think is going to be the next generation of skill sets that is going to be required. And I'm hoping that universities like USD can help redefine the glossary of educational terms as well as job descriptions. I don't know what happened to the slide, but don't forget to cross your T's and dot your comms. I thought that was cute. So here's the world that education lives in. These are the challenges, and is education, can we really truly transform education given the enablers and then given the barriers? And this is the real world. This is the real world of education. All the things that you all deal with in your world every day that in business, in private business, we don't have a good enough appreciation for the real dynamics of education. But can the system survive this chaos? Can it survive the enablers? Can it survive the barriers to truly change? In our community, Point Loma, we talked last night at dinner about connecting districts and counties. We've connected 10 schools in our community. And Carol Berry, who was here, was very instrumental in that, in creating a common vision of 10 schools, 6,000 students in Point Loma. And Point Loma is not an affluent educational population. It's 40 or 50% free lunch. It's very, very diverse. But as 10 schools, we got together as a parent community, as a school community, and said, can we come up with some values and visions around how we'd like to transform our educational community? And came up with Project Lightspeed to really see if we could shape a delivery system and a value system that believed in what you see there. And then we embarked on some initiatives. And one of them was to really see if we could move from teacher-centric learning and tools into what we'd call, in our community and others, in Christensen's, 21st century learning environments. And I won't talk too much on this slide because I want to show you some real-life examples. So this is images out of Christensen's book, but current delivery of teacher-centric delivery, where teachers are the gatekeepers of information and share that information with students, versus, and there's just an example of that. It's really not about smart boards in classrooms because that's just a digital version of a chalkboard. But to move to student-centric delivery, where the teacher's really the guide on the side, where student work is personalized, it's paced, and it's student-centric. And this introduces a whole series of issues and problems. And I'm going to show you, I'll show you an example of that. But in this world of student-centric learning, where every student has a device, so you see in this picture where every student's got a device, right? Now imagine all the curriculum being web-based, and imagine all the assessment being web-based. So teachers aren't inventing lesson plans anymore, out of that business. for the blocking and tackling of content standard-based work. They're out of the assessment business, manually assessing things, not doing that anymore. So now teachers have more time. And do we need more teachers, or do teachers need more time? And what are student ratios? Are they teacher to student, or are they time to student? What's the real metric? Is it 1 to 30, or is it time that I have to spend with individual student? But when every student's enabled with a device, and curriculum is web-based, and assessment is web-based, and it's standards-based content, now the teacher moves into a much different role, don't they, in this environment for the content-based work. And I'm going to show you 2 examples of that. This is 5th grade math. Now, this is taking an 18th century classroom and trying to make it a 21st century classroom, right? Traditional seating and not comfortable chairs, much different than this kind of setup. But these students here come in, they log on, they're using Apex Learning for their curriculum, they log on, and they start doing their work at 5th grade math, algebra. Imagine as you move through the curriculum, the challenges that are presented in this classroom. And these students here are clustered right here. Here's the teacher clustered with these students. These students actually are having difficulties in the same, let's say, algebraic equations. So they've been able to bifurcate using diagnostics that these students are struggling with the same content area and group those students to work for individualized instruction. These students here are moving forward. Now, look at this dynamic. You have some students in that class on chapter 2, you got some students on chapter 9, and you got some students on chapter 15. Think about that as a teacher. And I want to go back to that word, personalized, paced, and student-centric. Paced and student-centric. So in traditional delivery, when the teacher's on chapter 2, you're on chapter 2, right? When we can move to 21st century delivery, we've got paced learning. So in this environment, this moves down to credit recovery at the high school level. These are all students that have flunked classes, credit recovery, San Diego Unified, and they're actually taking their makeup courses online. And again, they can take as many courses as they want. This is a graduation coach in this environment right here who's helping that student with their work. And these are students that couldn't fit the makeup work in their schedule. But think about what's going on here. Here's the problem, I think, with this. This teacher is a chemistry teacher, and she's got students that are taking math, English, science, history. But if you expanded this notion and put it in a Starbucks-like environment where you had mentors and coaches and teachers of multiple subject areas that were assigned to students, and this student was in a room where he was doing his content-based work, standards, curriculum and assessment, where he had subject area content experts in that room, he could get help and he could reach out and say, Mrs. Smith, you're my English mentor. Mrs. Jones, you're my math mentor, right? Changes the whole dynamic of that learning environment, that student's pace, and he's not moving to chapter 3 until he masters chapter 2. Which today in traditional delivery, when we're ready to go to chapter 3, that student better be ready to go to chapter 3, right? Introduces some problems. So what's the teacher do when the student's on chapter 2 and the other student's on chapter 9? What happens when the student finishes the course in January? What does he do? Does he go back and help mentor other students? Or is he now in 6th grade? And how do we deal with that? Are schools set up? Can you move a student to 6th grade in the middle of the year? I mean, we've got some big, big issues as we web-enable curriculum and assessment. UC Berkeley putting lectures, and you heard MIT's putting their curricula or their courses online for free. You don't get credit, but you can take them. UC Berkeley's invented their old YouTube channel. Interesting dynamic at UC Berkeley. The professors actually said to the IT department, please shut down the wireless, because when the kids come to class, they're all on the internet. They're not paying attention to me. And what the kids were saying is, hey, I don't want to hear a lecture when I come to class. Podcast the lecture. Now what are we going to do in class? Interesting dynamic. Some podcasting they're doing at Point Loma High School. Again, easy to use, so teachers can use it. They can be trained in 30 minutes. Some initiatives we did to change the culture in our community, creating digital classrooms, enabling all students with digital lockers, the real-time school websites, enabling grades to be checked real-time by parents online so they could stay ahead of where the students were, but that required teachers to post grades real-time. Teachers post grades real-time, parents are enabled to check grades real-time, can stay on top of their students real-time as opposed to in arrears, like when they get the report card or the progress report. Online tutoring, which I think is a key part of 21st century education. Every student having access to online tutoring. which in San Diego they do in a partnership with San Diego Unified, business community, and the library. Every student with a library number can actually access an online tutor, grades 4 to 12, English and Spanish, 7 days a week. It's a great tool, not used enough. But if you take it a next step where every student has a device in school and can access an online tutor, what does that do to the ratios of teacher to student for help? There's an example of online tutor. And my kids' tutors are actually in India. The tutors at tutor.com are actually in the state, but they're all certified. And this is not one of my kids, but that's a tablet PC. And you can see that you can handwrite, head, voice, tutor, schedule an appointment, get the same tutor. Very efficient. I want to talk about A through E, and I want to wrap it up. Toolkit for the 21st century, the tools that we're going to need to prepare the educational platform for the 21st century. I would suggest to you that we need A through E. A is applications. We need to make sure that every single student has access to applications, A, period. There can't be any digital divide as relates to applications, whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft. And all those applications, by the way, are becoming web-based anyway. Keep your eye on Google Docs, what they're doing. How many of you use Google Docs in this room? Great collaborative tool. I would tell you don't even need to use Microsoft anymore. Google Docs, web-based document, collaborate with anybody, share with the world, easy to use. Anything you're doing collaboratively in your campuses right now, use Google Docs. Get a Gmail account, log into Google, set up your next collaborative project on Google Docs. You'll be amazed how much more, no more email and Word documents back and forth. Trying to find something. Web-base your documents, very easy to use. B's broadband. We got to get broadband to every single student's home, period. Take it off the table. So we feed students' minds with food, or their bellies with food if they can't afford it. We need to feed their minds with broadband if they can't afford it. So we got to get the digital divide off the table. Every student's got to have broadband at home. San Diego Unified is solving that, by the way. They have a program that was funded through Prop S, the bond proposition. It's going to provide every student with a device, a laptop. Okay? And inside that device is going to be an embedded AT&T chip, so all those kids will have cellular internet connection. So they're going to solve the broadband issue wirelessly. The C's curriculum, I believe for the base curriculum, we've got to web-enable all curriculum and all assessment. Let's get teachers out of the one-off inventing lesson plan business and the manual assessment business for the blocking and tackling content work so that they can spend more time with students. D's devices, we have to get a device in every student's hand, we have to. And the E's education, we need to retool and retrain everybody. And that starts just an image of applications, image of broadband. Let me just tell you about broadband just for a second. Seoul, South, this is your internet connection at your house. That's Seoul, South Korea. That's $40 a month. That's about $7 a month. We talked about the curriculum piece, the D devices, whatever the device is. Don't get in, that's a technology discussion, not a transformation discussion. Whatever the device is. And San Diego Unified's got some cool bulletproof devices. They're going to roll out devices, I think, grades 4 through 12. The district-wide, the next 5 years is going to be one-to-one. But one-to-ones without curriculum and assessment behind it, that's a failure. That's Maine 5 years ago. Throw all the kids a laptop. Everybody's got a laptop. Now what do you do? Right? So the publishers of the 21st century of content, who are they? I don't think it's Harcourt Brace. They're not a sponsor here, are they? Okay. But there's new publishers like Apex Learning. There's lots of web-based publishers now that are web-basing the content and the assessment, the curriculum and the assessment. As far as the training is concerned, and Alan November's coming too, right? Or is he not? He was here. He's been here. I want to talk about the E for education. We have brought thought leaders in partnership with the county to our community. And during the day, the thought leaders work with the teachers and staff at the school sites. And at night, they work with the parents in the community. It's been a really neat dynamic. So we've changed the dialogue in our community. We've got a much different dialogue about, we're not talking about, well, we kind of are, but it's less about bell schedules and a lot more about transformation and preparing our kids for the 21st century. Let's get the real agenda on the table. And get off of whether the kids show up at 8:32 or 8:35 and whether a period's 48 minutes or 52 minutes. Michael Furtick, I told you a little bit about him. He came and, again, worked with the teachers. And the model was this. Worked with the bleeding edge teachers first, worked with the rest of the staff second, and then met with the parent community at night. With that, I just want to say thank you, first of all, I went longer than I wanted to, but I want to say thank you to all of you for your great work in education. And I can't think of a more important job anywhere than the work that you all do. And I want to tell you how grateful I am for the work that you do in education, but also how excited I am about this next generation of dialogue that we are going to have in education. I think it truly is an exciting time right now of what has been and what can be. So I appreciate that, and I want to just open it up, because I think we have not very long. I wish we had more, but we could open up maybe a few questions, if there are any.
Matt, you know, you hit on, this is great, I think, it always is. And, you know, the thing about listening to Matt, I had a chance to do this more than once, is you come to you're kind of torn apart between this kind of terrific excitement for what can be, and also kind of just this wall of potential obstacles that we in public education are always dealing with. But I think the thing that I'd like you to maybe respond to is, I really do believe that you right on when you're talking about passion, and that is part of what we do in education, helping kids find passion. None of us are teaching kids how to find their passion in school, or at least we're not doing it purposefully. It may be happening. And I guess, and you also used the word motivation quite a bit, and I'm just wondering, are you seeing models out there? Are there ways? My sense of kids, the kids who are the digital natives, is that helping them find their passion might be even more challenging than it has been in the past before all of these great resources, and because they are becoming generalists. You know, the fact that they can access information across a broad range. And I've got an 11-year-old son, so I'm watching him grow up into this very age. Makes it seem like almost everything's equally passionate or not passionate or dispassionate. And I'm just wondering where and at what point we can help kids, and if you've seen any way that that's already out there, whether it's in Asia, travels, whether it's right here at Point Loma High School. Are there ways to help kids funnel or start focusing?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's a great question. And one thing you said is generalist, because this generation reads a lot. They just read differently. They don't read books cover to cover like we used to. They read lots of information. I think that's a great example. And is that okay? If I read 1,000 pages of information, but it's at a generalist level as opposed to 1,000 pages of 2 books, is that okay? And I mean, we've got some things we've got to deal with there. And so I think, I don't have the answer to that, but my gut is it's okay to be a generalist, because I think that's going to be this flat world of moving and being entrepreneurial and having 14 jobs and being able to think differently. The models that I've seen, I mean, I was impressed with what I saw at some of the schools. They were expat schools in Asia, in terms of the way they connected students to the real business world, or the real space that student was interested in. They made some interesting bridges there to the outside world, to bring the outside world more into education. I think High Tech High has done an interesting job of connecting some of those bridges. I don't think they've got it all figured out. I don't think anybody's got it all figured out. I mean, we're a long ways from that. But I think it's a great time to have this kind of dialogue. And by the way, if you haven't been out to see what Lemon Grove is doing, and I always mention it, and I'm sorry I didn't today, they're doing some really, really remarkable things in Lemon Grove. And people were coming from all over the world to see what was going on in Lemon Grove, but people in San Diego weren't going to see what was going on in Lemon Grove. Is that right? It really was. And a lot of what you see here are ideas that have been gleaned from the great work that's being done at Lemon Grove and continues to be done. But I think it's a great question, a great challenge. Yeah.
I think if you look at, at least my experience, a lot of elementary schools where a lot of the foundation technology I think needs to be developed, the infrastructure of technology is just crumbling. And your slide up there for a moment, you had some sort of cost analysis.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit, because it seems like you might have found something important.
Yeah. So we can't get stuck on the whole cost equation. We're going to need somebody like Gartner or some consultant to come in and put their stamp on that, right? So I searched all over the country to say, has anybody priced old delivery and new delivery? Has anybody priced that, to put a stamp on it, consultant stamp on that? Nobody's done that anywhere in the country, but I can tell you that was a cocktail napkin that needs to be expanded on in terms of what true cost is. I can tell you this in San Diego Unified, they spend $20 million a year on textbooks that are 4 years old the day they get them. Now, the way the devices are going to be funded was through the bond proposition, and I believe that every district will need bond propositions in the future. Just can't rely on state funding anymore. So every 4 years, every district's got to have a bond proposition. This is going to be the way we have to do business. And then we've got to write those bond propositions so they deal with 21st century. So the old bond proposition, Prop S and San Diego Unified, did not enable us to buy 21st century tools. This bond proposition was written differently. So I think we're going to need to figure out financing. You've got a great question. I think it's something that education needs to answer, because I think we're getting caught in that we can't afford to do it, when in fact we can, I think. Great question.
Two quick questions. You started off talking about passion, and you didn't define it, which is okay, but passion is not a technological word. Passion is an emotional word, and I didn't see any emotion in your slide. So let me pose the question.
Okay.
You also use the metaphor of lens, and I'll suggest that there are two lenses that we look at, particularly for young learners. So are today's media-rich kids, they're media-rich, are they sociologically and emotionally poor?
That is probably a question that I would not be qualified to answer. I can only give you my opinion about that. I think they're different. And I think they're much more aware, much more connected. I think they view the physical world and the virtual world much the same. I think that's okay. I just think it's a much different world than we live in. And I think that there's probably some pros and cons to that. But I think the pros, my opinion, personal opinion, is that the pros outweigh the cons. But it's a great question and something that we don't want to wrestle with. We need to wrestle with. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to frame, and I don't know that it's a question, but I'd like to see if you would be willing to comment on the equity disparity that exists among different communities. You spoke extensively about all these opportunities that have come about in the Point Loma community. Alan November has been there. You obviously have been instrumental in moving an agenda forward, an initiative forward that is more aligned with what we need to be teaching students. I'm wondering, how does that come about in communities where there isn't a Matthew Spathas? Where parents aren't savvy, they don't know who Alan November is.
Yeah.
They don't go on the internet every day.
Yeah.
How do we bridge that gap that is absolutely real and devastating to those communities?
Yeah.
Because those are the communities, and mind you, I believe that we're talking about probably a majority of the population, at least in San Diego, that are being left behind.
Yeah.
And so I'm very concerned about, especially being in San Diego Unified, there isn't that level of support that I can see that is bringing along those communities to this level of awareness, let's say. Let's not talk about fully understanding, but just awareness about what their children, what their students, what their kids are going to need in order to compete in a job market that's the job market of today.
I think you've identified a real challenge, and I'll answer it briefly because I know we got to wrap this up. But I think your question is a really important one. A couple thoughts on that. One is, I think we have to have a mayor who's got strong leadership, strong passion in education. I think that's key to our city's success, where it's one of the top 5 things on the agenda. I don't think we have that in San Diego right now. We've got a great mayor, but I don't think his top 5 agenda is education. That's one. 2 is I think we have to have superintendents that are digital age leaders. And I think San Diego Unified's lucky that they've got a digital age leader. And things aren't going to happen as fast or get out to your communities as fast, all the communities in San Diego fast enough. But San Diego has a digital age leader, a digital age superintendent. And San Diego Unified, to use that example specifically, has made what I would call IT strategic, in that they've made it a cabinet level position. And so they're going to look to be strategically more evangelizing these kinds of ideas in those communities. It just hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened as fast as you would want it or as fast as I would want it. But I think we're going to need digital age leadership at every single level. And that's going to be more of a challenge to implement in the communities that you describe. And I think it's a big, big challenge in our community here to solve that problem. But thanks for the question. It's a great question. Thank you all very much. I appreciate being here, and you've been a great audience, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.